They help us understand what grace and mercy are. These are some of the wonders of the wisdom of women. And we're going to be looking at that today as we look at our next chapter in the book of Esther. If you have your Bibles, turn there. Esther, and we're going to be looking at chapter 2. Esther's in the Old Testament, and if you open and you hit the book of Psalms, turn left 2 books, and you'll find Esther. So Psalms is one of those big things right in the middle of the Bible, then go to the left, go to the front of the book, and you'll find it, because we're going to be looking at the whole of chapter 2. We're going to be looking at the wonderful wisdom of women and how it's not just what they say, but it's what they do and how they live out certain things. And so I want you to follow with me. Esther chapter 2, starting in verse 1, it says this. Later, when the anger of King Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. Now I want to pause right there for a second. Just in case you guys forgot, or if you weren't here 2 weeks ago, when we started the series, Xerxes is the king of Persia. He is in control, and I'll get to explain, because I think I did a bad job that week of explaining how he falls in the timeline and how he's connected to Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego and Nebuchadnezzar and all of that. I think I did a bad job, and I might have confused some people, but I'll get to that in a second because this chapter actually helps explain it. But what you might have missed is Vashti was the queen, and Xerxes was showing off all the great riches of his kingdom, and it took him over a half a year to show off the splendor of his kingdom. And he was building himself up, puffing himself up into people's eyes and saying, look at what a great king and ruler I am, because at the same time he was planning his attack of Greece, because his father, Darius, the first great king of the Persian Empire, had been defeated by the Greeks. And so he wanted to go back and get revenge, and he was planning this attack. And so he was puffing himself up so the people would get on board. And during all of this, his queen, he wanted his queen to come out after 7 days of drunken festivities, and he wanted to show her off to all the men. And she said, I'm not that dumb. I'm not going to do that. And he said, oh, you're not. And he and the men decided that she was to be banished, never again to come before the king. And so she was kicked out. And that's what we're talking about. When his anger had subsided, when he got over, basically when he sobered up and realized that he kicked his queen out, which he really loved, he's coming to his senses. And that's where we are in verse 1. Now let's go on to verse 2. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made for the beautiful young virgins, or for beautiful young virgins for the king, that the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring in these beautiful girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who's in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. We're not going to get into that part because he's just being a typical man. Verse 5. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiachin, the king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and feature, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother had died. And I want to stop right there because it gives us this overview, this picture. It sets the stage for what's going on. The king is wanting to replace his queen. And he likes this idea of getting all the beautiful virgins to come, and he gets to figure out which one he likes the most. And we're not going to get into the details of that, but I want you to understand, it says here that Mordecai was carried away with Nebuchadnezzar, or under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon. Now, if you put up the timeline, which is the very next slide, Brian, it might be really hard to see. In fact, it is really hard to see. But over on this end is, you see Cyrus. These are the main leaders. Cyrus and Cambyses are the leader, the first. They didn't last very long, but they were kind of in the beginning of the Persian Empire before Darius actually staked claim to the empire himself. And they're the ones who took over. So way over here at 540 BC is the end of the Babylonian Empire. They are defeated, and the Persians are starting to take control. And so you still have people who are alive at this point, because it says here that Mordecai was taken captive under Nebuchadnezzar. And so Nebuchadnezzar was one empire. Xerxes and Darius was Xerxes' father, was a different empire, but they were both in power. One was going out, one was coming in at the same time. And so I didn't know if I explained that clearly last time. I want to explain it clearly this time. But it does play into the fact that we understand what's going on, because Nebuchadnezzar took them away. We have a time reference, and the Persian Empire took over from the Babylonians. And here we see some incredible stuff. And now to get out of the muck and the mire, to get to our first point, as we look at what we've looked at the first 7 verses here, we see something interesting. That is, wonderful wisdom is seen in true love. They may go, Pastor Rob, I don't see true love in a king that's trying to get all the virgins to see which one pleases him the most. You're right. That's not where the true love is. That's the world's twisted view of love. You see, the twisted view of love, which isn't true love, says, whatever pleases me the most, that's whoever's doing that is the one who's showing me true love. And that's selfish. And selfishness is never true love. So as we look at true love, we're not looking at what Xerxes is doing here, because he's messed up, he's off base. In fact, he says he's bringing all these virgins into his harem. I want you to think about the stigma that was to a good, godly Jewish girl who had been raised correctly. Because once you entered the harem, you were tainted by the fact that you were a harem girl. You never really got to leave the harem, because you were now the king's property. And the king could do with you as he pleased. That's what all these young girls were being brought into. Yes, there was a hope of becoming queen, but they were all just basically entering the harem, and they would never leave the harem. So when we think of this idea, and it's not a fairy tale in the classic Disney sense of the fairy tale, but it is a very real story that shows God's faithful love through the whole thing. I want you to think about it. Here's where we're going to get into it a little bit more, but here's a good Jewish girl who has been raised properly, and she's going through a horrible situation. Something that would bring disgrace to her and really mess with her mind and her moral stance. But God says, true love will never abandon you, will never leave you. And this is actually lived out in the person of Mordecai. Mordecai is there. He can't stop his beautiful adopted daughter from being taken, because the king's officials are taking whoever they think will please the king. And to resist would be death. So Mordecai watches this happen, but Mordecai happens to work in the palace, so he can keep tabs and he can keep in communication with his adopted daughter. And there's where you see the beauty of true love. As we look at this, we see Mordecai was a man, and he was characterized by this incredible love. When his relatives died and left this daughter, he said, I'll take her in. She'll be my daughter. Unconditionally, he adopted her into his family to raise her, to love her, to teach her. And we also know that as he did that, he wanted the best for her. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to watch over her. And a little bit later, you'll see that he gave her advice, and it might not seem like logical advice, but it was advice that was very important for her safety. So there was always that going on, that love and that protection. And that helps us understand. If wonderful wisdom leads to true love, we have to understand true love protects and wants the best for others. If you say you love someone, but you're not willing to protect them, every aspect of them, their reputation, their thoughts, everything that has to do with them, then you can't really say you love them, because if you're not willing to protect them, then you're in it for something for yourself, not for their betterment. True love is always for the protection and the best of others. But this protection doesn't mean you take away the harm that some people go through. There's nothing Mordecai could do to keep Esther from going to the harem. Nothing. So instead of complaining and blaming God, he says, how can we make a bad situation better? So he keeps in touch. He gives good advice. He helps. In the midst of that, he can't take her out of it. And that's one of the things that parents struggle with. Just in case you kids ever wondered, especially the kids that are still here, because you're a little bit older. Some of you are out of high school and you're wondering, well, what's the big deal about being a parent? Just tell me. No. We can't protect our kids from the decisions that they're going to make. We can give them advice. We can be there while they walk through it, but we can't protect them because that's part of being an adult. That's part of life. But that's something you should always remember. A parent is there, a godly parent is there for you no matter what. And God wanted to demonstrate this, that here we have Mordecai who's there no matter what, but Esther also demonstrates true love. She demonstrates true love because she trusted and obeyed what Mordecai said. The Bible, all throughout Scripture, from the beginning to the end, says the one way to prove that we love God is to obey His commands, to follow His decrees, to obey Him. And so often we go, God, I love you, but I don't want to obey this one. Then what you're saying is, I don't really love you, God. And I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm just trying to get to the point because true love says, yes, we will protect and we will watch over, but true love also says, I will obey and do what you say. That's what makes a marriage situation so beautiful. Because you have people who are willing to protect and take care of each other, but then you have people who are willing to obey and do what's said. And when you put the two together, it's a beautiful marriage, literally, that God has ordained. But we get everything twisted. You can't tell me what to do. I have the right to my own opinion, my own mind. Okay, you can follow that. It doesn't work out so well. Just psychologically speaking, they've done studies from before World War II and after World War II, because World War II was kind of a tipping point. When the men went off to fight the war and the women had to step into the workplace. And they didn't necessarily go back home when the men came home, and they started exerting their rights. They've proven that the amount of stress in ladies' lives went up dramatically. Not because they're not capable, but because God has designed us to be in this beautiful union. And if you want to know about that, we can do a whole series on marriage and what love is there. But I just want you to understand that true love here is demonstrated in the fact that true love is seen in our trust and our obedience. And we're mainly talking about God. So we're on the second subpoint. I don't know if anyone's controlling that anymore. But we're on the second subpoint that, first of all, true love protects and wants the best for others. And then the one under that is true love is seen in our trust and our obedience towards God. And as we look at that, we need to understand that this was especially tough for Esther. Because everything Mordecai had taught her was being challenged by her being taken to the harem. By her being made one of the king's concubines. But she knew that Mordecai loved her because Mordecai never left her side as much as possible. So he was always there. He was always talking, communicating with her. Now I just want to hit on a couple things about true love before we jump into the next couple things that we see in this chapter. But I want us to understand that true love, as we look at this true love, there's three things I want to bring out, and that is, love is not optional for a child of God. You don't get the right to choose if you're going to love or not. If you are a child of God, if you're a follower of God, you will love. That is a basic requirement. It is a heartbeat of God, for God so loved the world. And if we accept Him, we will then in turn love. It's part of that picture where Jesus describes it as, I'm the vine, you are the branches. When we're connected to Him, what is in Him flows through us to produce fruit. The biggest thing that flows through Him is love for others. And so that will flow through us, and it will produce fruit, and other people's lives will be changed. So we don't have an option when it comes to this. Love will be there, and it's not an option. In fact, we are commanded by God to do it. And it's summarizing in the greatest commandment and the second greatest commandment. The greatest commandment is what? Do you guys remember? Love. Okay, so what are we supposed to do with all our heart, all of our mind, and all of our soul, and all of our strength? Love God. That's a command. That's the greatest command. These two commands summarize all of what's found in Scripture. If you want to follow everything that God's commanded, do two things. Don't be like the Jewish people at Jesus' time that had, 638 different commands they were trying to follow. Just do two things. Love God with everything you are and have. And the second one is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And there's actually an implied one in there. We love God, we love ourselves, and then we can love our neighbor. But the loving ourselves and our loving our neighbor happen together, but you can't separate them. So if you feel bad about yourself, if you hate yourself this morning, get back in touch with God and love God, and you'll see that you're worth loving. and then that will flow to everyone you meet. So we're commanded by God that we're supposed to love. And the second thing is that we are, under that we're supposed to love our families, we're supposed to love our neighbors, which includes our enemies sometimes, and so we're supposed to love. And another thing we have to realize is the only way to have true love is through a right relationship with God. If you have a broken relationship with God, you will not have true love flowing in your life. It is spiritually impossible for it to happen. Because if you're not connected completely to the vine, have that right relationship with God, you won't have the love of God flowing through Christ into your life. You might be getting a little bit here and there so you're not broken off. You're just kind of hanging on by a thread, but you're not actually living, producing anything because there's not enough going through you. So if you find a lack of love in your life, towards yourself, towards others, towards your enemies, go back to your relationship with God. It's something that you always hear from me because it's a baseline of our life with Christ. Are we connected to Him? Do we have right relationship with Him? The only way to do that is to have that right relationship, and Jesus describes it as the fruit. Love is the fruit of the Spirit. We have to be connected to Him to produce it. And the last one is Jesus insists that we are characterized by love. It's commanded, we get it through right relationship, and it is to be our crowning mark on our life as individuals and as a church. He said that people will know that you are my disciples by your faithful theology that you study on Sundays. By the fact that you only sing hymns and you don't sing choruses. The fact that you have hard wooden pews, so you're suffering for Christ through every service. No, these are all preference things that we like. He says the one thing that will signify you as my disciples is your love for one another. So this love idea, we can't get away from it. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but mothers have this incredible ability to show us love and pass on that wisdom in ways that others can't necessarily see it. Here's a great example. I had a kid who got hurt yesterday. He came to me and I said, "What's wrong?" He goes, "I ran in my forehead into the counter." I said, "Okay, shake it off and get over it." That's the love of a dad. No blood, no foul. Let's go on. Rub some dirt on it. Get back to play. He wasn't happy with my answer, so he turned to Mom. Mom got down on her hands and knees. Mom did what moms do. She loved in a way that I didn't. Because I'm a father, not a mother. That's my excuse. But we need to understand that this love is incredible. It is life-changing. It's one of the lessons we can learn from Esther. Let's pick up in verse 8 and continue to read. It says this: when the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many girls were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Hegai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Hegai, who had charge of the harem. So there's no misunderstanding about what's happening. They are taken into the king's harem. Now let's continue to read. Verse 9. The girl pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with beauty treatments and special food. He assigned her 7 maids selected from the king's palace and moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. And I just want you to note something there, that when you're willing to stand and be who God created you to be, and you're willing to be loving and follow His advice, He takes care of us. Even in the bad times, He takes care of us. Here, in the midst of what was going on, where she was being put into a situation that wasn't morally what she had been taught, God said, "I'll still take care of you." It's kind of like some of the stories that come out of World War II, where in the concentration camps, one particular story is where some girls were brought into a concentration camp and they were put into the particular barracks. And at first they complained because that barracks was infested with fleas and lice. Everyone who went in there got it, and they complained until they realized because there were so many fleas and lice in there, it was so prominent and so evident that the guards would not go into that barracks and harass the ladies, which they were known for doing in all the other barracks. That horrible situation of being in a concentration camp, where you never knew who was going to be dead the next day. The horrible situation of being surrounded by guards who treated you worse than property, and they could do whatever they wanted, and they were blessed by their superiors for doing it. And then to realize that you had to sleep in flea-infested and lice-infested beds. How can it get any worse? But all of a sudden they realized this was God's blessing to protect them. God always wants to give us that blessing if we're looking for it. So keep your eyes open. Let's go on to read. We stopped in verse 9. Verse 10, Esther had not revealed her nationality and her family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth in the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. And I want to stop there because it gives us our second point about wisdom. And wonderful wisdom is seen in shared wisdom. So often we go, wow, I have this great thing, I have this knowledge, and we get puffed up on the knowledge that we have and we're not willing to share it with other people. Wisdom that isn't applied to everyday life, in other words, shared with other people, isn't really wisdom, it's just information. And anyone can get information, especially in our day and age. Once you have the information portals in your hand right now, all you have to do is click a button and the almighty Google will give you whatever answer you need. Because it is the all-knowing icon on our phones. But that's just information. It is kind of a joke of mine and Raymond's with certain people, certain generation, I should say, because we'll be talking about something, oh, I understand that, I Googled it. Really, you Googled it. Working on mechanics with someone who has no clue about mechanics. Oh, I Googled how to do that. I can take over. Fine, you take over. You Googled it. You have the wisdom. You have the information. Yes, but you have the wisdom. Go ahead. And then they try for about 10 minutes. I don't know how to do this. Well, here, pick up this tool and do it. It's that easy. Yeah, that's called wisdom. You have the information and you apply it to everyday life. And that's wisdom. And so as we look at this, wonderful wisdom is seen in shared wisdom. We have to be able to share it. Esther was taken away, but the wisdom of Mordecai went with her. The advice that Mordecai gave her went with her. And at first she probably didn't understand why. It didn't matter. She just understood that someone wiser said, here's a bit of information, apply it to your life and demonstrate wisdom. And as she did that, God blessed her and she was honored. And the cool thing is, Mordecai was still right there to help, to encourage, to remind. That's what a good teacher does. Think about mothers and mothers sharing wisdom. I'm sure all of you were sat down at about the age of 6 months when you could sit on your own, and your mother got out this long piece of paper and started reading all the rules and all the wisdom that you'd ever need. And when she was done, she said, fine, you have everything you need. Don't come to me anymore. I'm done taking care of you. And she put it in her pocket, walked out, and never saw her again, right? Because that's what a good mother does. No. You're thinking, okay, you're being absurd, Pastor. Yeah, you're right. I am, to highlight a point. A mother shares her wisdom and is there to follow up, to help out, to encourage, to re-instruct when it needs to be done, to help change course, to help, to encourage. And that's what Mordecai was doing. It says he went to the courtyard every day to make sure she was doing okay, to make sure she was paying attention to the wisdom. Now you see, Mordecai wasn't ashamed of his heritage. Everyone knew he was a Jew. He wasn't ashamed of his ethnicity and his religious beliefs that were connected to being a Jew. But he knew that there's wisdom in when you share knowledge and when you don't share knowledge. Here's a simple example. If you get pulled over and you happen to have a concealed weapons permit and you happen to have a loaded firearm in your car, and the officer walks up and you stick your hands down next to your seats, the wrong time to tell him that you have a loaded weapon is when your hands are down by your seats. Because he's going to pull his gun and it's going to get really dicey really quick because he doesn't know if you're reaching for that weapon. Now, it's always good to let an officer know that. So if you get pulled over and you have that, and that's the case, what you should do is take your keys out of the ignition. This is just my experience. Put both hands out the window so he can see them. And when he comes up and he sees that your keys are out of the ignition, so you're not going to take off, and he sees both hands in plain view, you can say, thank you for coming to my rescue. No, don't say that. You just be polite and say, officer, one thing I want you to know is, yes, I do have a concealed weapons permit, and I do have a concealed weapon in the car. I want you to know about that. Would you like that weapon? I'll tell you exactly where it is. That would be the proper way. So sharing the information at the right time in the right way is really important. You're not lying, you're just using wisdom. Taking information and applying it to everyday life situations. One of the situations that I hate to say, but teens are really bad at sharing information on and doing it the right way is the day of an event. Like, we have a band show today. Oh, when was it? It started 10 minutes ago. I'm late. Okay, that's a wrong time to share the information. That was not wisdom. That was very bad use of your information. To share it 2 days beforehand so you can schedule it properly, that's good use of your information. So as we look at this idea of wisdom being shared, we need to understand that wisdom shared knows when and how to use information correctly in step with what God is doing. That is what Mordecai was trying to communicate and get Esther to do. You have this information, and it will be useful at some time. Wait until it is the right time to share it, because you're not necessarily know when the right time is. So wait on God, see what God's doing, and act appropriately. It's how we apply the information in a practical, everyday way that makes it wisdom. So there's lots of intelligent people that you will meet in this world. I could even venture to say there's lots of intelligent people in this room. But I'm not going to say that there's as many wise people in this room as there are intelligent people. Because a lot of people don't know how to apply that information in practical, everyday ways to prove that they have wisdom. One last thing about wisdom, and it's simply this, and that is, this wisdom only comes from one place. It comes from God, going back to a relationship again. In fact, God summarized it this way in James chapter 1, verses 2 through 8. And I love this because this is, to me, applies so beautifully to Esther's story and the situation. That's why I'm going to read all 6 verses here. It says this: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. And perseverance must finish its work, so that you will be mature and complete, not lacking anything." I want you to think about that for a second. Esther was facing trials and persecutions. She was being taken and forced to do things she didn't want to do. But she had to persevere through that. And that perseverance made her mature so that she wouldn't lack anything. And then it goes on to say, "If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously without finding fault, and it will be given to you." What a beautiful promise of God. Where do we get wisdom from? Not information. Information you can get from Google. Where do we get wisdom from? It comes from God. "Well, Pastor Rob, I disagree with you. The wisest person I ever met and the one I talk to all the time is this relative or this person that I know that's lived many years." Yeah, but where did they get their wisdom from? Who put that person in your life so that you could have a relationship with them? Every good and perfect gift comes from our Father in heaven. So that includes our friends, our relatives. It comes from God, and all we have to do is ask Him. Let's go back to our stories. Pick up in verse 12 where we left off. It says this: "Before the girl's turn came in to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted, she was given to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go there, and in the morning she would return to another part of the harem, to the care of this guy, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return unless the king was pleased with her and summoned her by name." Now I'll stop right there, because as we look at this, we're going to read the rest of it, but when you apply information to your life with wisdom, it leads to this next thing about the wonderful wisdom, and that is the wonderful wisdom is seen in living with simplicity. So often we get caught up in trying to make things more complicated. Now we don't say, "Oh, my life is simple, I'll try to make it more complicated," but we go, "Oh, this is what I have and that's what they have. I want what they have, so I'll do whatever it takes. I'll complicate my life to get what they have." And we make things more complicated. And this is just a reminder. It says that they could have whatever they wanted. And then let's pick up where I left off. Because it says in verse 15, "When the turn came for Esther, the girl Mordecai had adopted, and the daughter of his uncle, to go before the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women, and she won his favor and his approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all the nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberty. I want you to see what happens when we decide that we're going to apply wisdom, and wisdom is seen in living with simplicity. The results are amazing. If you'd ever had the opportunity to meet the richest man in the world 25 years ago, you would have been dumbfounded. Because he lived out in the country, he went to a church smaller than ours, he was still driving the very first pickup truck he ever bought, and he was still living in the same house he bought when he first got married. And he's the richest man in the world. He still went to his simple country church, he supported it. Yes, he could support it in ways no one else could because he was the richest man in the world. But he realized just because God's blessed my life with wealth doesn't mean I need to make it complicated with things and stuff and make my schedule busy, because he always kept God as a priority. If you're wondering who I'm talking about Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. And until his death, he set an incredible example of a simple life. He never let his riches go to his head. His kids, on the other hand, they're fighting over the fortune still. And they each want their share because their lifestyle has exceeded what they how can you take the largest fortune in the world and not have enough for 3 kids? I don't get it, but that's the situation they find themselves in. They don't have enough to split up, so they're fighting over it because their life became so complicated. We need to learn to make things simple. Esther said, I can have anything I want to take to the king. But he's not looking for the things that he has that I bring to show off to him. He's looking for the one who pleases him the most. So I'll just take me. I'll show up and just be myself. I won't make it complicated. I won't be confusing. I will just be there. And it says that she won the favors, the king's favor, and the king was more attracted to her, and she became queen because of that simple life. Are we willing to keep things simple? Are we willing to stay humble instead of trying to chase after the next and biggest thing? In our ever-increasing busy society, the ability to keep things simple, if we can do that, will literally save lives. There are people who are having nervous breakdowns, who are having surgeries to try to take care of uncurable ulcers because they're pursuing the busyness of life. The richest man in China has just decreed, and he's very proud of the fact that his workers work a 70-hour work week minimum. They don't deserve any more time off, he says. Just because you're rich and you can control what happens doesn't mean you're right. And when you look at the suicide rate in China, it might be an indication that things are out of whack. He's not the first person who thought that doing all of this and keeping busy was the right way. If you go back and you look at communist and socialist leadership throughout the history of the world, they've all thought that this idea of 6 days and a day of rest is based on the Bible. Since we don't believe in God or the Bible, that's stupid. We can work every day, and every time they do it, economies crash, health disappears, people suffer because we need that day of rest. Now, on the flip side, there's other nations who are the up-and-coming economic powers in the world who work 4-day work weeks and give their workers 3 days off because they go, a healthy, energized worker is better than one who's here longer but doesn't do anything except sleep at their desk. We need to pay attention, and simplicity is a wonderful thing. So, what we're talking about here, and the key to simplicity, is simply avoiding the tyranny of the urgent. And there's a huge difference between what is important and what is urgent. Urgent is that notification that sounds, that says, you have a new text message. That's not important at all. You can ignore it. No, they'll be offended. Who cares? They need to grow up if they're offended. If you don't text them back within 30 seconds and they're offended, they need to get over it. That's urgent. Important is, wait a second, I went to visit someone because they are, excuse me for a second, they are sick in the hospital, and so me giving them my undivided focus is more important than me texting someone back. We need to make sure that we're focused on the important over the urgent. So often we get distracted. It can be distracted by the people around us. It can be distracted by what's going on in society. It says it's urgent, so we need to respond. We need to do something right now. No. Some of the most successful executives in every part of our nation. So you can take it from people who are filling executive roles like pastors, or people who are the presidents of companies or business owners. Some of the most successful ones are the ones who refuse to return a call or a message for the first 6 hours after they get it. Well, that's insensitive. What if it happens as an emergency? They'll text back. They'll call back. Trust me, I've been there. When something's emergency, I get multiple contacts. I go, okay, something's more important. But if someone just calls me, doesn't leave a message, or just says, get back to me, just let it lie. Because 80 to 90% of things will be solved within those first 6 hours, and you don't need to deal with it then. You're keeping your life a whole lot simpler. And then when you finally do get back to them and say, hey, I'm following up what's going on, they say, oh, you'll never believe what happened. I had this problem and it took care of itself, and you can say, praise God, I was praying for you during this time. And literally pray for them, don't make it a lie, but pray for them. But it takes care of it. It takes care of itself, and it doesn't get you sucked into the urgent. You can stay focused on what's important. So today is Mother's Day. Hopefully all of us, if our mothers are alive, will either make a phone call or we'll spend time with mothers honoring them. Don't let your stupid phone distract you from that. And I used to be able to say, youth, don't let your phone distract you from that, but half the adults have the problem too. If that thing buzzes, if it makes a noise, if it looks at you weird, you have to pick it up and do something with it. You don't. It's not important. It's just urgent. So we need to avoid the tyranny of the urgent. If you want to know about the tyranny of the urgent, there's a great little pamphlet. It's called The Tyranny of the Urgent. And I can help you get a copy of it. It's a book that I read on a semi-regular basis, probably every 5 years. Because as I read it, God points out, hey, you've been letting the important here get pushed out by the noisy urgent over here. Get back to what's important, and the urgent will get taken care of. Focus on what's important. So what does Pastor Rob say the most important thing in life is?
Relationship.
Your relationship with God. So if you see urgent things going on here and you think, oh, I need to go fix it, get back to your relationship with God and watch God fix it. He'll do a much better job than you will. Just throwing that out there. Here's some quotes from that little pamphlet. One of them is, your greatest danger is letting the urgent things crowd out the important things. And I just talked about that. But as we look at that, we just have to be who God wants us to be and do what he wants us to do. That's the important thing. You are who you are at this time and place because God wants you here and now. I don't mean physically in the church, even though that could apply. God wants you in church. But he created you at this time in history and put you in Ponderay County or Idaho, or I don't think we have anyone from anywhere else, but he put us here for the purpose that he has a mission for us here. Just be who God made you to be right here now and do what he's asking you to do. And you will be able to live a simple life and accomplish amazing things. Don't keep dreaming that, oh, if only God had put me in this city or that city and all the opportunities. No, God had you here for a reason. What is that reason? Just do what he wants you to do. Keep it simple. It's a whole KISS principle. And when it was first introduced to me, I go, what? I don't listen to that music. So I didn't like KISS. But the reality is, KISS just simply means keep it simple, stupid. Okay? Someone taught me that because I was being really stupid at the time. It was in one of my first jobs, and he said, you make it too hard, just keep it simple, stupid. I'm like, huh? He goes, the KISS principle. And he happened to be someone who was into heavier music than me, and he had one, I'm like, huh? No, not this, KISS. And then he explained it to me. Some of you are going, who's KISS? Look up music history, you'll figure it out. Talk to Raymond, he'll tell you all about it. But we just have to be who God wants us to be and do what he wants us to do. Here's another quote from that little pamphlet, The Tyranny of the Urgent. And it speaks to all of us. It says this: the root of all sin is self-sufficiency, independence from the rule of God. When we fail to wait prayerfully for God's guidance and strength, we are saying with our actions, if not with our words, that we don't need him. How much of our service is actually us going it alone? Because that's not serving God at that point. It's serving us. Swallow our pride. Be who God made you to be. Enjoy the simplicity of the life that he's given you, regardless of where you are. Because remember Sam Walton, the richest man in the world for decades? He's kept that simple life. He didn't let anything force him out. And that actually brings us to our fourth point, the final point this morning. It's found in the rest of the story. We read all the way up through this great celebration where the king is giving liberally gifts to everyone because he's found a new queen. Yay for him. And it says this in verse 19. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther had kept secret the family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do so, or told her to do. For she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. Again, wisdom. Information applied properly is wisdom. Verse 21. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. When Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. When the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were hanged on the gallows. And all of this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. And you might be going, why on earth does it end that way? And what point can we get from that? Well, you have to understand, and we see it stated much later in the story, that Esther didn't have the freedom to walk into the king's presence whenever she wanted. So when it says that Mordecai reported this assassination plot to the queen, and it says the queen reported to the king, she took the initiative to do what was not protocol and to walk into the king's presence to warn him of something that was going on. And that brings us to our fourth point about wisdom. Wonderful wisdom is seen in acting courageously. Every day we have the chance to act courageously. Esther and Mordecai both said, we will stand up against the king's officials who are plotting an assassination, and we will take the information we have, we will apply wisdom to it, and we will pass it on. In both cases, they had to go out of their comfort zone. They had to do what was right in spite of the possible danger, because if these two officials found out, they could get killed in the process. If the king wasn't in a good mood and didn't like what he heard, he could execute them. But they were both willing to act courageously, regardless. And I want to ask you, are you a person of courage this morning? As you think about the answer, you might be like the man who was heard bragging about the fact that he cut off the tail of a lion with a pocket knife. Think about it. He cut off the tail of a lion with a pocket knife. And someone, after hearing this and thinking about it, said, why did he cut off his head? And I go, well, someone else did that already. And that's when I found the lion. A lot of us have that kind of courage. We'll be really courageous if someone else has already done the dirty work and the hard part. No, that's actually the opposite of courage. You might be wondering, well, what is a good definition of courage? Courage is doing what is right even when you are afraid. It's a pre-thought-out action in spite of possible consequences. There's lots of brave people. Brave people are usually those who respond in the midst of a dangerous situation without thought to themselves. So, running into a burning building to save a family, that's a brave thing to do. Jumping in front of an oncoming car to push a kid out of the way, that's a brave thing to do. But this was a premeditated plan of action that said we were going to do what is right, regardless of how fearful we might be of the consequences. We're going to see their courage lived out as we look at the rest of Esther in the next number of weeks. But courage is doing what is right even when you're afraid of the consequences. Now, if we take all of these aspects of wisdom, womanly, motherly wisdom, we see that it does an incredible thing. All of these, living in accordance or by the guidelines of the wonderful wisdom of women that we've looked at this morning, prepares us to be used by God for such a time as this. And it leaves us with some characteristics. I mentioned them at the beginning. I want to mention them again now. It leaves us being described as brave, as warriors, as blessed, as beautiful, as strong. People can say where fear ends, that's where faith begins, because they've seen it in our life, they see faith lived out. They see grace heaped upon mercy. That's the result of applying this wisdom to our life.